When I applied to Oxbridge back in 2017, there was almost no reliable information out there. Everything was based on folklore, stories passed around by older students, random Reddit threads, a few generic pieces of advice like, read your personal statement, think out loud, smile. Obviously. Even the university's own advice has not been updated in 11 years. We're living in a completely different world now. Interviews are online, dynamics have shifted, but the advice hasn't. So one evening, I sat down and thought to myself, hang on, I've got a business that's helped hundreds of students get into Oxbridge. Surely there has to be a pattern, common themes that unite the people who get in. So I went through my notes, revisited mock interview recordings, spoke to my tutors, reflected on years of experience, and I realized that there are 3 uniting characteristics that every successful Oxbridge candidate shares. And that's the purpose of this video. It's the combination of 8 years of experience, hundreds of interviews, and insights from tutors across Oxford and Cambridge. If you can master these, you'll give yourself a real chance at getting in. But let me be clear, this is not something you can master overnight. As the famous quote from Flowers for Algernon on intelligence goes, it comes very slowly, and you have to work very hard to get smart. But before we dive into those 3 differentiators, let's just set the scene, because one of the biggest reasons that students fail is not because of a lack of ability. It's because of a mismatch between expectation and reality. Now, you might think that you're going to be grilled on your subject or quizzed on your personal statement line by line. But in reality, all Oxbridge interviews, and I mean 99% of all Oxbridge interviews, come down to 2 types of questions. Number 1, the stimulus response, and number 2, the academic discussion. The stimulus response is something everyone finds terrifying at first, because it's designed to be. You're going to be given something completely new, and most likely outside of your academic comfort zone. It might be a diagram, it might be an article, it might be an essay, a photo, or even a short poem. And for this type of question, it's not about what you know, it's about how you think. How you cope when the safety net of memorized knowledge disappears. Most of the time, you'll get this during the interview, but in some cases, especially for humanities, you might actually get this an hour before, or if you're really lucky, you'll get this the night before. So what does that actually look like? Well, here are some examples that I've seen over the years and ones which are published on my course. So first up, let's take a look at an example from medicine. Describe what features you would expect a cancer cell to have. Probably not very nice, a bit evil, not someone you want to hang around with. I don't know, I'm not a medic, but hopefully you can give that question a good go. Next, geography. Can you explain what you think the below diagram represents? Well, this is my time to shine because I studied geography at university, and NPP stands for Net Primary Productivity, which is broadly a measure of where all the vegetation is on the Earth. But we're not going to get into that detail here. Next, history. Please analyze this source and suggest what a historian can infer from it. I have no idea what's going on in that photo, but it looks pretty complicated, and this is reminding me of my 10-marker era from GCSE history. But if you're a historian, maybe you can tell me in the comments what you think's going on there. Now, some of those questions might have sounded a bit intimidating, right? But here's the secret. You're not expected to get the answer straight away. Instead, the interviewer will gently guide you towards the answer by dropping a few clues and hints along the way. And so do not think an interview is a solo performance where you're asked a question and then you have to do a massive monologue about what you think the answer is. No, ask the interviewer questions. They are there to guide you and they want to see you do well. Okay, so that's number 1 done. Let's take a look at number 2, the academic discussion. Now, this is really an intellectual conversation, and it's often sparked by something that you wrote about in your personal statement. It might be an idea. It might be a book that was particularly interesting to you. And what you've got to understand is what's going through the interviewer's mind at this point is they are thinking to themselves, okay, how far can I push this student in this conversation until we reach the logical limit of what they understand and what they know? And these questions are going to be deliberately open-ended. They just want to see, can you have an honest conversation about your subject without delivering a rehearsed answer? For example, in my case, I was asked a question about economic inequality. In particular, What do I think the solutions are to economic inequality? And this was something that I researched about in my personal statement. So this was my time to shine. I brought in the ideas of Thomas Piketty, of Danny Dorling, and it led to a really nice conversation with the interviewers. And that's all the interviewers are asking themselves. Can this person have a structured and intellectual dialogue with me? Can I see myself teaching them? And just remember, if you feel like the interviewers are pushing you further and further into alleyways that you're not necessarily comfortable with, and you almost feel like you're being backed into a corner, then that is the best sign that you are doing really well and that likely you get a place. All right, so metaphorically, we've mapped out the terrain. You now know the two question types, the stimulus response and the academic discussion. Now it's time to talk about the weapons you can take into battle. The first trait, and this is by far the most powerful, is something I call intellectual gravity. In my 8 years of helping students get into Oxbridge, there is one trait, one thing that every successful candidate has. They have weight. Their ideas have gravity. You can just feel it the moment they start talking. They're brimming with knowledge. It's almost overflowing. Every answer they tell you has depth, and their presence just has this aura of intellectual gravity. And let me be clear, this is not something that you are born with. It's something you cultivate through relentless curiosity. And you can do that too. You've got to remember that at their core, Oxford and Cambridge are temples of knowledge. Every great idea, every revolution, every Nobel Prize winning piece of work has ultimately come from an obsession with understanding things more deeply. So it kind of makes sense that the students who get a place at Oxbridge are the ones who exhibit that trait. That's why when people tell you things like, just read your personal statement, or practice thinking out loud, or do some mock interviews, all of that is fine. But without a strong knowledge base, that advice becomes meaningless, because you have to remember that the currency of success at Oxbridge ultimately boils down to two questions. Number one, how much do you know? And number two, how seamlessly can you apply that knowledge to new contexts? So onto some practical stuff. How do you actually build intellectual gravity? Well, the answer is far simpler than you think. Immerse yourself in your subject like you never have before. Read outside of the A-level curriculum. Pick up books, textbooks, articles, journals, podcasts, anything that expands your knowledge outside of the current universe. Let your knowledge snowball until it becomes an avalanche. Because you have to remember that an interview is fundamentally an assessment of your knowledge. So the bigger your knowledge base, the more likely you are to remain composed and the less likely you are to panic when you're presented with something new and challenging. At the start of the video, I said to you, it's not about what you know, it's about how you think. And that's true, but only up to a point. Because here's the thing, you've got to remember that knowledge is the only thing within your control, and it's also in the control of all your competition out there. So the more knowledge you have, the more difficult it will be for any other student to compete with you. And that's why you should go and build intellectual gravity. Okay, trait number 2. Telling someone to simply practice for an interview is such an unhelpful piece of advice. It's like saying to someone who wants to be an actor, mate, just go and act, you'll be fine. Clearly, it runs so much deeper than that. What does true preparation actually look like? What separates someone who is simply prepared from someone who actually goes and wins an offer? Now, there is one thing that all the best candidates are doing. And so let me introduce you to a concept I call nervous system mastery. Let me lay out an argument for you. Our bodies are computers, hardware and software. You can install all the software you like. You can read books, you can read articles, you can go down YouTube rabbit holes, you can watch videos like this. But ultimately, if your hardware cannot handle the software, the system's going to crash. It's like trying to install the latest version of iOS on a Windows 1998 computer. It's just not going to work. Now, what on earth does that have to do with interviews? Well, everything. Because if your body has not been trained to handle real interview pressure, then regardless of how intelligent you are, your body and nervous system is going to betray you. That's why you get a shaky voice, an awkward laugh, a mind blank, or a brain freeze. It's not because you're not competent, it's because the hardware isn't ready yet. But what if you could fix that? What if you could train your nervous system to stay calm and composed no matter what is thrown at you? Well, you can, but it takes time, patience, and discipline. It's not simply about preparation, it's about physiological conditioning. You're training your brain to stay composed in 3 environments: under time, under pressure, and under uncertainty. In everything I've seen over the last 8 years, there are 2 ways you can do this. The first one is very simple. Simulate the real thing. Ask someone that you do not know to give you an interview. It might be a friend of a friend. It might be a teacher that you don't know at school. It might be someone from my organization. If that's not possible, then use ChatGPT. Sit down, tell it to give you a question, go and set a timer, and then answer it under pressure. It's not glamorous, but that type of repetition trains your nervous system to remain lucid under pressure. Okay, this second one is advanced territory, and I promise you, nobody your age is going to be doing this. There's a concept from chess world champion Joshua Waitzkin called thematic interconnectedness, which is the idea that what you do in one domain of your life influences every single other domain. For example, if you're impulsive, scatterbrained, or unstructured in your day-to-day life, then why do you think all of a sudden you're suddenly going to be composed and calm in an interview? How you operate in your life is how you operate in an interview. So you have to treat your life as a training ground by turning ordinary moments into opportunities to rewire your nervous system. And I'm going to give you 2 examples that have worked insanely well for me over the years, and ones which I still swear by to this day. The first one is about learning how to stay calm under pressure. I used to be terrible at verbalizing my thoughts when I was nervous, but the one thing that changed everything for me was solving problems and verbalizing my thoughts while I was exercising. You heard that correctly. When I was running, when I was lifting weights, or anything that involved my heart rate increasing. Now, it sounds crazy, but when you think about it, if you train your brain to operate while it's under physical stress, and bear in mind there's no difference between physical and mental pressure, they light up the same area of the brain, then imagine what you could do when you're sitting still in an interview. Your brain simply becomes adapted to thriving under high-pressure environments. The second is about how to remain present and focused. The biggest reason why students get mind blanks or panic during interviews is not because they're incompetent, it's because they're not present. They're worrying about saying the wrong thing, they're worrying about sounding stupid, or worrying about completely botching their future. Now listen up. The biggest thing that gets overlooked before a student goes into an interview is how much you have used your phone. If you are glued to your phone, if you're flicking, scrolling, swiping, watching dog memes, then you are literally training your brain to not pay attention. Thematic interconnectedness. When it's time to focus, your brain simply does not know what to do. So every time you pick up your phone, be very careful because you're choosing to be distracted. In summary, you can read any book you want, but if your hardware is not properly trained, then your body will betray you when you need it the most. Right, okay, the third and final differentiator. Now, I've talked about this before in detail in another video, but I'm going to repeat it here because it's that important. An Oxbridge interview is not just a test of competence, it's fundamentally a test of likability. And so that brings me to the third and final trait, conversational alchemy. If you think about it, every Oxbridge tutor is potentially signing up to sit down with you one-to-one every single week for 2 to 3 hours for the next 3 years. So they're not just choosing a student, they're actually entering into a long-term relationship. So yes, you need to be intelligent, but ultimately, if you're cold, arrogant, or difficult to speak to, then you've already lost. So instead of optimizing purely for competence, you need to optimize for connection. The single biggest factor that's often ignored, which actually has the highest correlation with Oxbridge interview success, is knowing your interviewers. Before you even step foot in that room, you need to make sure you know everything about your interviewer. And I mean everything. Make sure you read about their books, their papers, their lectures, their niche academic interests, and what gets them up in the morning. Now, this is the academic equivalent of showing up to a first date, having remembered everything about the person in front of you, their favorite film, the name of their dog, what color their mother's hair is, their dad's birthday. Ultimately, if someone did that for you, then you'd really think that they've made an effort to remember you. Now, obviously, there is such a thing as taking this too far, where you come across as a stalker, like Joe from You on Netflix. However, in most cases, if you do your homework and you do your research, then you can truly make the interviewers feel special. And this is what I call conversational alchemy, turning knowledge into connection. The best candidates aren't just simply answering questions. They're fundamentally having amazing conversations. You want the tutors to stop judging you as a candidate and instead to start seeing you as a student that they want to teach. And if that happens, trust me, you're in.